Okay, another software development question, question 8. It says, in a simplified game of darts, and I'm going to emphasise simplified, so don't apply here any rules that you may or may not know about darts. You don't need to know anything to be able to answer the question. It's a more common thing when you see it. The one that you sometimes get a lot is golf comes up, and you might not know the rules of golf, but the description of the question should be enough to go off. So in a simplified game of darts, player starts with 301 points. The player has 3 darts. The number hit by each dart is totalled. So, in other words, if you got 20, 20 and 20, your total would be 60. And this total is subtracted from the score. So, your 60 is subtracted from 301. And you're trying to get your score down to 0. So the game continues until the player's score reaches exactly 0. If a player's score would go below 0, the total is not subtracted and the game continues. It's basically input validation. So it's only going to accept a value that would take it to 0 or greater than 0. If it would take it below 0, then that's too many points and you need to score fewer points. And that's kind of meant to be the challenge of the game. So an algorithm with a simplified version of the scoring is shown below. We've got score starts off at 301. We've got rounds as a variable that starts off at 0. While score is greater than 0, and it is because it's 301, set rounds to rounds plus 1. So rounds is going to be 1. Then declare darts as this empty array. Dart 0 from the keyboard. So let's say I put in 20 in there. And then darts 1, let's say I put in 20 with the second dart. And the third dart I only get 8. Set 3 darts to dart 0 plus dart 1 plus darts 2. So that's 48, because that's 20 plus 20 plus 8. If the score, so that's if 301 minus 48 is greater than or equal to 0, and it is, then you can subtract that. So you can say set score to score, take away the 3 darts. So we've got 301, take away 48, which is 253. If it had taken it below 0, it wouldn't subtract the score, it would send a message and get them to do it again. You can see that to display has just gone on to the next line there. So we've got a trace table that shows how the values would change. So I've already done the first iteration here, because I found that rounds was going to be 1 at the end of that loop, because each time we go round we're adding 1 to rounds. We've got 3 values, and then what the total of that, so the total of those becomes that, and you can see it for yourself. If you look at like 60 plus 60 plus 60 is 180. Now let's go through the trace table line by line with bits that are already filled in. These ones are just blanked out because it would make it too easy if that went 2, 3, 4, 5. So the second row, there's nothing that we would need to fill in. They get 60, 60 and 20. You add that up, you've got 120 plus 20, it's 140. So you can subtract the 140 from 253, gives you 113. And that's already worked out. Third time, they get 60, 60 and 60, that's 180. The problem is that 180 is more than 113, so you can't subtract it, so it stays the same. So they have to go again. They get 25, 20 and 80, which adds up to 53, which is thankfully less than 113, so you could subtract that and you're left with 60. And then the last thing that you had to work out was in here what they scored, right, to get a total of 60. 20, 20 and 20 is the simplest one, but you could have any 3 integers that add up to make 60. Within the context of the question, it's not expecting you to know what are possible scores and darts or anything. Just if you had any 3 values that add up to 60, you'll be fine, because really that is the point of the question. And then explain how a breakpoint could be used when testing the solution to confirm the values in the trace table. So there's 2 points, and I've written them on separate lines here. So we could stop the program at a particular line, and that is really our first point, although I've expanded just to make it clear. In this case, it's the end of the iteration, because the trace table is the end of the iteration. So we stop the program at the end of each iteration of the loop, and then we inspect the values of the variables, which normally would be the point we would make about a breakpoint. But in this question, to confirm the values in the trace table, then we're saying we check them against the values in the trace table. And effectively, we see, are they the same? So that would be the two things. And that's a question that's come up before in at least one exam paper. Then we've got over the page a part C. So programs amended to include a function that doubles or trebles, in other words triples. Just so that's what they call it. So multiply it by 3. So if multiple, this parameter multiple, if that's D, then set points to points times 2. If it's T, then set it to points times 3 and then return the points. So we've got this sort of function. First of all, we've got the updated program contains a new function called multiply. That's what we've just seen. State the value that will be returned if the user enters 12 and T. So we've got 12 going in there, T goes in there, so it's this one, multiple equals T, so that's 12 to 12 times 3, which is 36. So that's how we get 36. Using a programming language, complete the code for line 39 that would call the function. So we're going to call the function and store the value in a variable. So I've got my updated points variable here because that's what I was storing it in. This one is calling the function, so if I just switch to to a different colour pen. So that multiply there, in fact I'm going to use a highlighter. So let's go multiply, that's calling the function multiply up here. And then my parameters, well, this is where my formal and actual parameters don't always have the same name. So at this point in the program, I've got darts I, because that's the one that we've got from the user. And then multi-letter, because that's what we've got from the user. So multi-letter becomes multiple, darts I becomes points. The reason I know to do two parameters here is because if I look at my function, the function is expecting two parameters in that order. The first one is representing the number of points and the second one is representing the letter. That's how I can work it out. So remember, it's the order of the parameters is what's important. I keep flicking to the wrong page. Program uses local and global variables and parameter passing. State the corresponding formal parameter associated with the actual parameter, so darts I. So darts I is the one that's been passed in. So what's the formal parameter that goes with that? Just change pen colour. So that is that. Just like multi-letter becomes multiple. Explain how the scope of the variable points affects the maintainability of the program. So I've got 2 marks, so 2 things to say here. First of all, I'm just making a statement of fact. The scope is local because it doesn't say that in the question. So I'm identifying, right, I know that that's a local scope. Therefore, effectively I'm pivoting here. Therefore, edit in one module won't affect local variables with the same name in other modules. And that's my kind of stock answer for local. And then if I go over the page, we've got the start of a different question, so I'm going to split those up again.